Hello, I'm Mark Siegrist filling in for Dan Jones. Thanks so much for being with us. This edition of our Roundtable, evil comes during a special Colorado screening of Batman. Former Governor Tommy Thompson's ability to grasp the issues is called into question. And is Milwaukee, Chicago, well, a partnership for the good of economic development such a great idea? We'll be addressing that as well. Rick Horowitz comes along in just a minute with his interesting perspective on the week's news as well. Joining us on the panel this week, longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, along with Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and frequent fill-in host for News Talk 1130 WISN. And we're joined by retired business reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Avi Lank. Topic number one now, it's the deadliest U.S. shooting since the Fort Hood massacre back in 2009. It happened during a midnight showing of the new Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises. It happened in Aurora, Colorado. Dressed in black and wearing a flak jacket and a gas mask, a young man enters the theater with violent thoughts. He drops a canister of noxious fumes, then opens fire in the crowd. When the shooting was over, 12 people were dead and dozens wounded. Authorities already have a suspect in custody. Joel, what's prompting this kind of repeated behavior in this country?
Boy, when I heard today that President Obama, had like called off a day's campaigning in Florida because of this shooting, I remember the first time I think I went to see President Obama campaigning here in Milwaukee, he had to do the same thing. Yeah. Because that was the day of the Virginia Tech shooting, and he didn't make a political speech. He just talked about us caring for each other and learning from this and trying. And what really upsets me is not a damn thing has happened between those two events, and we're smarter than that. President Obama or the Republican Party haven't done a thing to keep deadly weapons out of people's hands, to keep murder, to prevent murder instead of encouraging murder. In fact, even though President Obama hasn't done anything, and I feel he's really let down a lot of people for that, he's been accused of being anti-gun, and so he has to prove that he's not anti-gun. And the Republicans will attack him as just secretly, even though he hasn't done anything, he wants to take away your guns. And when we put it in those political terms instead of the human terms that I think everyone on this panel understands. Our friend, the good people we know, the decent people we know, they don't walk around with guns that are made for the sole purpose of killing other human beings.
Let me just toss this out.
And we're not talking about hunting, and we're not talking about anything else. We're talking about something that is made for murder.
But let me just toss this out. Is this a gun issue or is it a mental health issue?
Of course it's a mental health issue, but it's also a gun issue because we allow deadly weapons to fall into the hands of anyone, and we make it like a political right that mentally ill people can get a hold of guns, and that these sorts of things can keep happening over and over again, and that's not right. And we're smarter than that. We can do common sense things to reduce this kind of violence.
What can we do?
Well, what we should not do is exhibit the knee-jerk reaction we're hearing from Joel and we're hearing from the liberal-dominated press today, and that's immediately.
I tried to say nothing political.
You hear your entire opening was political.
I just got through saying that neither Republicans nor Democrats have done anything.
That sounds political to me.
Oh, really?
You should not really politicize this tragic event. You had Jeffrey Dahmer with smoke bombs and guns and weapons out there in Colorado, and this is just an evil person, who, by the way, is legally sane. The automatic assumption is that he's got to be out of his mind, that he has to be crazy to perpetrate a heinous act like this. But in the legal sense, he orchestrated this.
You know none of this, by the way.
Yeah, but he thought, after covering the Jeffrey Dahmer trial and talking to legal experts, they'll tell you that this person didn't just snap, didn't just go off. He planned this. So we have him in custody. We basically have an admission. He makes his first court appearance next week. I hope this goes through the criminal justice system swiftly and that he is punished. What can we do? I'm not sure you could have prevented what happened there unless you had metal detectors and a police presence inside movie theaters, which we're not going to do. And I think
we don't want to.
And we don't. And I think this hammers home the point that in this day and age, unfortunately, sad but true, there is no place in this country, or any place in the world for that matter, where you're guaranteed personal safety.
Well, it's interesting that there's two things. One, it's interesting you're talking about the world because we had this bombing in Bulgaria where these Israeli tourists were blown up earlier this week. I think that is political, but the deaths are just the same. And one of the things that occurred to me when I heard about this tragedy is that this is the kind of thing that does go on in other parts of the world with some degree of regularity, places like Afghanistan and other places in that part of the world.
Place.
And, you know, maybe that will help us understand a little better the just plain human tragedy of what is going on there. You know, legally this man may be sane. From what I understand, he bought the guns legally. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is sane or that he should be able to buy the guns legally. I don't know you know, precisely the policy remedies, but it ought to be made a lot harder for people who have these kinds of proclivities to be able to get a hold of guns. That's not a political statement. I agree with Joel. It's neither party has the manhood to step up to the plate and say this is something that needs to be addressed.
Neither party is to blame here. It's not President.
I'm not blaming anybody.
I'm blaming everybody.
But
Yes,
you started out by bringing President Obama and the Republican Party into this. President Obama and the Republican Party had nothing to do. Let's
They had nothing to do because they didn't do anything.
Well, what are they
because they
supposed to
did
do?
nothing.
Ban guns? That's what you'd like, and
No,
that's not the solution.
Kevin,
President Obama and the Republican Party are not to blame. Place the blame squarely on the shoulders where it belongs to this lone single gunman.
You did not listen to what I said,
Yeah,
Kevin.
the point that I thought that Avi was going to make when he started talking about the world is another clear distinction between the U.S. and the world, which is that the gun fatalities in this country are 10 times any other country in the world. And that is because of the way we encourage gun ownership, the way we make it a religion, the idea that, you know, these are rights and we can't take away people's rights. To hear you say that when you represent a party that takes away voting rights, that takes away civil rights, and is proud of doing that, but somehow taking away the right to carry around a deadly, murderous weapon and to use it,
well, let me respond.
Is somehow interfering with...
You say this junk every week, and it's incorrect. We haven't taken away voting rights. We haven't taken away civil rights. And
there are lawsuits right now that say you have.
Do you know any gun owners? Do you know anybody that owns a gun? I know plenty.
Do.
And the vast majority, and I would say most, if not all of them, are good, decent, honest, law-abiding citizens that will not walk into a theater with a gas mask, smoke bombs, and rifles and start shooting.
That is absolutely correct, but the law should...
Thank you.
The law should find a way to make it harder for people with the proclivities to do that to get a hold of these guns.
And I believe...
And I'm not totally sure how you do it, but that ought to be that ought to be the civil discussion we
are
have.
in most, if not all, gun laws.
And the
People with mental health issues are not allowed to get guns.
That's right, but then it's made very bureaucratically difficult to find out who they are.
That's true.
And your party fights even checking to see what mental health records are. They cover up who has concealed carry records. They don't want the public to know that, so that if anyone knows that there are these people that have problems, you make up reasons for it.
Let me ask you another question.
You simply resist any idea that we should somehow control
I'm certainly glad that we're not politicizing this tragic event on television.
Kevin, you're the one that calls.
You opened the window. You opened the door.
Let me ask you one other question. A lot of times you hear from Second Amendment advocates.
Why am I on the witness stand?
You're not.
Because
you haven't even been sworn in yet.
Kevin, you're easy.
We've got to move on to topic number 2.
One other question, though. If there had been a lot of other guns in that theater,
maybe some more lives would have been saved.
That would have been horrible.
I anticipate your question.
More lives would have been lost.
I anticipate your question, and it's too bad that someone in that theater wasn't armed. under the law, under concealed carry, because maybe he wouldn't have killed as many people.
This guy was wearing bulletproof armor.
How does he get in the theater?
More people would have been killed.
I don't want gunfights in my theaters.
That's
I don't want more
absolutely
people
right.
shooting in my theaters.
Absolutely right.
You know
Thank
what?
you, Joel.
Finally, we agree.
All right. It's great to be back. So much for Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of any fellow Republican. Wisconsin's Republican primary for U.S. Senate is getting a bit nasty. Businessman Eric Hovde took off the gloves recently and challenged former Governor Tommy Thompson's ability to grasp complex economic issues. The exact quote was something like, "I think there are issues that I could talk about that Tommy would have a hard time understanding." The other GOP contenders in the race, Mark Newman and Jeff Fitzgerald, pretty much stepped back like a couple of patrons in an Irish pub when they heard those fighting words. Well, now, former Governor Thompson might very well be a country lawyer, but he's certainly politically savvy. Where did this statement come from?
After all those years of being the most successful and most popular Wisconsin governor in recent political history, I thought his comments were out of line, to tell you the truth.
Hovde's, you mean?
Hovde's, yes. It's fine to have ideological disagreements if there are any, and they're more alike than they are apart. But to question his mental capacity to understand finance and the economy, this is a governor who put together oodles of budgets, made tons of budget vetoes, and to basically call him out.
Was he? Do you think he was coached to say
the former Lieutenant Governor Margaret Farrow today called Hovde out and said that he owes Governor Thompson an apology, and I think he does. That there's no place for that in politics, and Republicans should know better because, as you correctly alluded to, there's that 11th commandment. You know, you want to go after Tommy for his past record, fine, but to say that he doesn't understand issues, that's nonsense.
Yes,
Let's not have any sob stories here. Come on now.
You know what goes on in planning sessions. Do you think he was deliberately coached to say that?
I think he was probably.
Well, I mean, incorrectly, but deliberately.
Absolutely, I think in this day and age of highly paid political consultants, when they give you advice, you take it. But it would be nice to see someone say, like Eric Hovde, say, you know what, that's crossing the line. That's out of base. That's just wrong. And you know, they have to put their names on those things.
Yeah. Would you advise him to do that and just to get rid of it, say I'm sorry and get rid of it?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. But when's the last time you heard a politician, especially a candidate running for high office, admit an error?
It's interesting though that what Tommy seems to be responding with is this ad that makes him look like Marlon Brando. You know, riding his motorcycle in his leather helmet with his goggles and
that's Tommy.
Yeah, but it seems to me what he's saying is, look, I'm virile, I'm young, I've got a young attitude. I can certainly understand this stuff. I think what Hovde is doing is probably, you know, hitting Thompson where he's vulnerable. And you know, there may be this 11th.
You don't like old guys?
Well, there may be this.
You got three of them sitting right here.
I know, but you know, and Hovde's trying to make a contrast. And there may be this 11th commandment in the Republican Party that you don't speak ill. But another one of Hovde's selling points is that he's this outsider who doesn't care about that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, he's lived the last 24 years in Washington.
Why in the world would anyone be surprised that within the Republican Party, a party that calls the President of the United States un-American, questions whether he was born in this country, calls him a socialist.
How about sticking to the Wisconsin GOP?
Why would anyone be surprised that the Republican Party starts name-calling?
Talking points.
I'm talking about the Republican primary. And the Republican
you're talking
primary.
about President Obama.
Would you quit interrupting me? Seriously, you know, it's a Republican primary. They are turning on each other with exactly the ugly tactics.
No, they're only turning on the front runners.
That they've turned on,
Obama.
You know, Obama all the time, and that they run nasty campaigns all over this country. This is nothing new. In fact, this isn't even new for Hovde towards Tommy Thompson, because a few weeks ago, he was asked to grade Tommy Thompson's record as governor, and he said, well, he did pretty good during some of the early terms, but probably his last term he'd give you an F. Yeah. And when did anyone, rate Tommy Thompson as an F within the Republican Party?
No one.
I've heard a lot of Democrats that have done it. And Hovde, here's this guy. He comes out of nowhere. He has no apparent qualifications that we know of. All he has is $4 million that he's put onto television. And we've now find out that he lied. He wants to take subsidies away from farmers in Wisconsin, but he took farm subsidies for real estate land that he held that he was never intending to farm. He took tobacco subsidies for not growing tobacco on some of the land that he had for real estate.
In his defense, if you can do it, if you can file that kind of stuff, why not?
Well, and if he can buy this election for $4 million, shame on the Republican Party.
Well, and negative works, but this is a different kind of negative. This is an outsider.
This is towards a Republican.
Well, it's going after a beloved Republican by a guy who hasn't lived in Wisconsin for the last 25 years. It's kind of like spitting on the flag.
Well, it's sort of like he said, I'd like to be in the Senate. Let's find a place to do it. Oh, Wisconsin, I used to live there. On the other hand, his dad did lose to Fred Risser a long, long time ago in a state.
So have a lot of people.
Well, but it's not like he's completely disconnected from the state. The thing that I find so, frankly, scary about him is that we don't know much about him.
He needs to be
Nobody
vetted.
knows anything
He
about
needs to be vetted.
And the Journal-Sentinel has not looked into who he really is.
They haven't, but
has not told us who he really is.
If you go on his website, which I did, I see some things that certainly raise red flags for me that might be green flags for other folks.
Such as?
He talks, he's got this ad about that he didn't like the Wall Street bailouts, right?
Okay.
And that's what the ad is, that I didn't like the bailout.
He benefited from.
He benefited from, and you look at his website, he's a community banker.
Well, that's why he needs to. You're right. He needs to be vetted and hasn't been vetted except by some conservative publications who found out that, yes, he gave money to Jim Doyle's campaign, which would raise eyebrows with Republicans. And yes, he has supported large tax increases, which would raise eyebrows with Republicans.
Those are the worst things. That's worse than having money in the Cayman Islands like Mitt
Far
Romney does.
worse. Trust me. But what's really
That's worse than having millions of dollars hidden in a
being
tax
wealthy is not a crime. No, what's going on here is that Hovde realizes that he has a shot, but he's going up against, an icon, and he is behind by a lot. So then you obviously go negative, and you hope it works.
And if you take him at his word, he didn't even know what was going on in this fairly comprehensible real estate company that he owns part of.
Why would you take him at his word?
Why would you take him at his word that he's going to be able to help going on things that are much more complicated and complex on the national level?
All right, let's move on now to topic number 3. Wisconsin and Illinois business and political leadership got together this week to discuss the concept of a Chicago-Milwaukee megacity. The idea is for both markets to work more closely together for job development and recruitment for the benefit of the greater region. The notion was prompted by a Paris-based economic think tank called Organization for Economic Cooperation. Talk about things coming out of nowhere. The dialogue got interesting. I guess during the meeting, much of it was just grumbling from Illinois officials about the fact that we're inviting people up across the border and giving them good deals, speaking of good real estate deals, in southeast Wisconsin to relocate their businesses.
It is interesting. This is an interesting topic to talk about, and the Journal-Sentinel decided the region should talk about it. So they had a conference at Marquette University and had a bunch of experts in. It doesn't have any place in reality right now. We've got a governor that is trying to raid businesses from Illinois, big billboards saying so. We've got a governor who has destroyed the idea of a transportation connection, a high-speed rail connection between Chicago and Milwaukee and Madison and Minnesota. The way that you get a regional economy going is good transportation. Above all,
we have that between Milwaukee and Chicago.
No, we don't. We don't have high-speed rail, and the commuter rail system, which would also have been a real boon to that corridor, was also killed by this state. This is what really killed me about what Scott Walker did. The link between Chicago and Milwaukee that would be most beneficial to a institution that Scott Walker used to run,
Right.
Milwaukee County's airport. Milwaukee County's airport could easily be the third airport for Chicago.
Right.
And he trashed the rail connection, which would allow more
Right.
people from Illinois to use that as their third airport. I hear flying out of Mitchell Field. I hear people from Chicago who are flying out of Mitchell Field.
Right.
Because they say, this is the biggest secret in the world, that you can actually, walk up to your airplane and you don't have to go through O'Hare and you don't have to go through all that horrendous stuff. And they found a way to get here, but we're not capitalizing on it by building a really good transportation connection.
It gets worse, and I will tell you why. First of all, if you go up in one of these airplanes and you look down, Chicago and Milwaukee are one city. They ought to be one city. We ought to do everything we can to encourage it. You're right, transportation is a key to that. Well, there's some bureaucratic stuff we can talk about in a minute. Transportation is a key to that. By not getting the money to turn it into a high-speed link, we are forfeiting an advantage we have over other Midwestern cities like St. Louis and Detroit, which are going to get the money and are going to make it so that it will not take much longer to get from downtown Detroit to the Loop than it's going to take to get from downtown Milwaukee to the Loop. That's one thing. The second thing is, the biggest problem to this integration, which makes sense economically, in fact, it makes sense to extend it to Madison, but we won't talk about the high-speed rail in Madison, all right, is that there are two states involved. You can talk all this Paris, people pointed out there's a gazillion local governments.
Going so well.
Well, no, there's a gazillion local governments, and that makes the cooperation hard. France is different than the United States. Even I will admit that.
Nicely.
But the biggest problem is the state border, because even if there was one municipality that was from Milwaukee to Kenosha, and don't write me letters, I'm not saying there will be, and there was one municipality that was from Gary to Waukegan, you'd still have them in different states. And unless the federal government passes some laws which have been advocated by people like some economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, that would just plain outlaw state subsidies to businesses by making any benefits you get non-deductible to the businesses that get them, it's inevitable you're going to have this kind of competition. And the worm is turning. Now Wisconsin has a lower tax rate than Illinois.
Idea. This is
no, it is not silly, Kevin.
And if I may, Matt, now, I mean, if I was a columnist back in the 70s and was writing The Innocent Bystander, I would write something to this effect, that we can't even come to an agreement with our next door neighbor about selling them water, and yet we are supposed to become this mega city with Chicago, which we will always live in their shadow some 90 miles away. It's just not going to happen. And I believe there should be competition. We live in a global economy, but that doesn't just mean Mexico or China. It means Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Ohio. And we should be trying all we can to try to lure other businesses here.
So add jobs in Wisconsin and they lose jobs in Illinois. What kind of sense does that make?
That's the free market. And right now, it's a wise idea to be laying out the red carpet to Illinois and saying, come on over here, because Illinois' business climate is in the tank.
But Kevin, the competition is good. I agree with you.
It's always good.
But we're not competing with Chicago.
Why do we want to?
Kevin,
we can't.
Kevin, we're competing with Los Angeles, we're competing with New York, we're competing with Cleveland. And the biggest economic development tool Milwaukee has, if you take away all this man-made stuff of borders and stuff, the biggest economic development tool we have is Chicago.
I don't want to be, I don't want to, we have a few seconds left, and I don't want to be like Chicago, a very corrupt city that is not managed very well at all, and I don't want to get in bed with Chicago.
But if you want to get young professionals to Milwaukee, you need to find opportunities for both members of a couple, and there's a lot more of them in Chicago than there are in Milwaukee.
Okay, you're a bit of a wise guy tonight. You know that, don't you?
Not just tonight.
He always tries, but fails miserably.
Wisconsin used to be famous or infamous for its Frankenstein veto. That was the power that the governor had to cross out certain words and numbers and spending bills and change the meaning of legislation. Well, our colleague Rick Horowitz thinks Frankenstein has been reborn. Welcome to presidential politics 2012. Rick?
It's easy to totally misunderstand someone when your goal is to totally misunderstand someone. So let's talk about the art of quoting out of context, okay? But first, a little context. I defended Mitt Romney a while back, and I criticized the Democrats when they sliced and diced a Romney quote to completely distort what he'd actually said. It was his famous, "I'm not concerned about the very poor" quote, except that they left out the rest of the sentence. We have a safety net there. Now, as I said at the time, you can question whether the safety net is strong enough or whether Romney's repairs might make it even weaker. But what you can't do, shouldn't do anyway, is pretend that Romney said he's not concerned about the very poor, because the plain meaning of his words, the quoted part plus the left out part, was clearly something else. Unless, of course, you were trying to misunderstand him. And this week's deliberately misunderstood, edited to deceive special, it's a recent Barack Obama speech, and it's the Romney folks doing the distorting. The president was making his usual "no man is an island, we're all in this together" pitch. And he was pointing out how even, or especially, successful people had a great teacher who helped them along the way, an American system that encouraged entrepreneurship and rewarded hard work, or they simply benefited from the network of roads and bridges that brought shoppers to their door and got their products off to market. If you've got a business, the president said, you didn't build that. The infrastructure, he meant. Other people had helped plan and finance and build that infrastructure. Perfectly obvious what he was saying. Unless, of course, you were trying to misunderstand him. Then you were as shocked and scandalized as Mitt Romney was, who then tried to shock and scandalize everyone else by yanking that one line totally out of context, like it was the only thing Obama had said. And then Romney's campaign went even further with an ad that shoved together words Obama never actually said together. That's right, they just erased the stuff in between. Context? Delete. Look, there are cameras and microphones everywhere these days waiting for that next macaca moment. So why not just invent one? It's a cut and paste, mash it up, Photoshop, and auto-tune world. But a digital lie is still a lie.
Thank you, Rick. Always thought-provoking stuff from Rick. Good to be with you guys. I guess we'll do it again one more time this summer.
Good.
Dan Jones is back next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.